So backstory, first time I met Yele was in 2016. And, Peace and I were attending, I think it was our first tech event in Lagos. And we met you. I think then you were working with Starter. It was an Ingressive event. Same time I met Ingressive. And do you know the crazy thing? I had a fireside chat like this at the Lagos event with Maya. So, I think it's the universe. Okay. And, ever since, I met Yele in 2016, I've watched Yele do really amazing things. And he's someone I really admire. And I think a lot of us really admire. And so, resilience in building, really, when I think about you and I think about your journey so far, and even the last 1 year, resilience is the word that I think about, right? Because I think it takes a lot, right? But now going back, right, you started, at Starter, and then Ingressive as I met you, and then you started Microtraction in 2017. And then in 2019, you worked at Binance, right? And then later that year, you founded Bundle Africa, and then you moved on to Nestcoin, right? So going from, your days at Starter and going through Microtraction and then, now going into the blockchain, industry, what led you from one thing onto the other, right? With respect to like your purpose and your mission, what pretty much led you from one of these things to the other, and how did you get to where you are today?
Very good question. So it's good to be here. I think this is the first event that I'm speaking at, and so when Peace and Joyce told me that they were doing this, I was like, I'm going to be here. So it's good to see a lot of familiar faces. So I think something about me is like I've been very consistent in terms of like my own personal sort of vision and mission. And so that would be like the first thing I would say. Like everybody should take time to figure out like what is my own personal mission and vision, because that's like your compass for life. And that's because when I was 21, I was in medical school and I really hated it. And the question for me was like, what do I want to do in my life? What will I do if money wasn't an object? If all jobs paid the same thing, like what will I care about? And I realized that above everything, I cared about like personal happiness, right? So I had to find a mission that was bigger than me. And that was this idea of how do we accelerate Africa's transition into a sustainable and developed economy? Okay. So even at I would say 10 years ago, like that was very clear. And the how was, I think back then, and Dairo, who's in the audience, can confirm, I used to say it was going to be at the intersection of technology, capital, and entrepreneurship. And I think if you zoom forward to sort of what I do today, you would see why I'm very interested in the blockchain space, because the blockchain space is the combination of technology and finance as part of like the core innovation of it. Right. And so that has just been like this consistent sort of thing for me, and everything that I've done kind of weaves in and around the same ideas. Okay. And because this mission is not something that I don't know if we would see Africa as a developed and prosperous continent in our timeline. Hopefully that's the case. But it's such a big mission that you can tie almost anything towards, right? And that's kind of like what keeps me going when things get really hard.
Okay, thank you very much. Speaking about, when things get hard, the last 1 year has been a very difficult year for entrepreneurs, startups, organizations at large, right? And Nestcoin had its share of it, right? In the last 1 year, you have lost money, you have downsized your team, you have redefined your strategy, you have launched a new product, and you have recently raised money, right? How have you been able to find the clarity, to keep going in spite of all these things? And most importantly, how have you been able to muscle up that resilience and, to go through all of these difficult times?
To be honest, like, it's easy to come on stage and kind of talk about these things now. I remember reading The Hard Things About Hard Things when it came out a few years ago. Trust me, if you've read the book and something bad happens to you as an entrepreneur, it's gonna hit different. Every single founder that I've spoken to that is going through challenging things, I always tell them to read the book again. And that's because, you're like, wow, like it helps put things into perspective. It was extremely, extremely challenging, especially because I personally felt that there were lots of people that were impacted by this, and it wasn't due to their own fault. I'm a highly self-critical person, and anyone who joins any of my companies, I take it like I feel very responsible for them. And so that was probably the hardest part. It was like trying to make sure everybody in the company that had to, that was affected was good. We actually had our HR sort of just focus on placing people that worked at Nestcoin. Now, the beauty of Nestcoin is that in the Web3 space in Africa, it is probably like one of the top companies. So most people were trying to hire people from Nestcoin, and we placed almost everybody in a relatively short space of time. But that was like the first thing. I think I had to take a step back and really sort of question every single thesis that I've had around like the future of finance, the role of the technology, what I really wanted to do, what I felt that, was the best foot forward. The second thing I would say is like action produces information. So even if you don't have full clarity on like what the end outcome is going to be, the truth is that you have enough information today to figure out the best next step. And almost every investor, the one consistent thing that they said was that, Yele, you acted so quickly and you were so transparent about like what was going on, and that's why they wanted to back us again, right? So, the truth is, I definitely know I have a bit of privilege in terms of like just the history of things that I've done. And when people looked at the vision for what we were doing or what we're trying to achieve, everyone was like, number one, if we're successful, this is not an African solution. It could be something that solves like a really huge problem for the kind of world at large. Number two, our team is really experienced. Taiwo, my co-founder, and Henry, they built Carbon. We scaled Bundle to about 1.5 million users. We're doing about 600K in revenue a month. I launched Binance in Africa. So it's just like a history of like getting shit done. And that sort of helped us to be able to get the investors that we need. I always joke that I'm probably one of the few people that have raised money from like Binance, FTX, and Coinbase. But it's just that commitment to, the vision. But it's I'm not gonna lie, it's really freaking hard. It's really, really, really hard. And some days you wake up and you're just like, man, I don't want to do this. But then you ask about the why again, and then you're like, you know what, I'm gonna keep going.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Now, speaking of, having to downsize your team and do all of that, how were you able to figure out the right people to keep and to keep building with, really?
To be honest, like, I don't think... So, most people never really understood what Nestcoin was, right? Like, if you study the history of personal computing, there's a company called Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC was literally like the best and brightest people that were interested in this idea of personal computing, and then they were building and incubating a bunch of different ideas. There's a story that Steve Jobs went to Xerox PARC, saw the personal computer, and then made the Apple II, right? And so when I raised money for Nestcoin, I was saying that I want to create the Xerox Spark for the crypto industry in Africa.
Right.
So essentially, Nestcoin had a venture arm that had 13 investments in 1 year.
Right.
And then we incubated 5 businesses at the same time. So what essentially happened was I spun out the gaming company. So that's been run by Yemi.
Okay.
We spun out we actually built a neobank, right? We're getting a license here, right? So I spun that business out. It's currently in stealth.
Okay.
So that's 2 companies that we spun out that are operating independently. The only company that we wound down was the media company. And that's because media is really difficult to raise money for. I'm not gonna lie about that bit. And then I took 2 of the other products, which was Nubian and Onboard, and I was like, I'll run that myself.
Okay.
So essentially what ended up happening was I decided which company do I want to run,
Okay.
and then which ones do I want to give away. And we gave away, essentially reduced my ownership stake in those companies, and then gave the general managers the businesses to run as CEO.
Okay.
But I don't know, I'm not really someone that is big on social media. I don't like to talk about what we do, but people who were within Nestcoin kind of understood that vision. So it was easier to kind of decide it. There's no point having 100% of something that is worth 0. So
Okay.
I was very happy to give away these companies to these incredible team members, and I think today everyone is quite happy because they've gone from having, let's say, 1% or 0.5% in Nestcoin to owning 20%,
Okay.
30% in these companies that they're running now. So yeah.
Okay. And, still talking about, what the last 1 year has been like, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of businesses have had to shut down and everything. If you were going to advise people like this who find themselves in situations, like these, on how to get back on track, what would you say to them?
I think the first thing I'll say is actually, no, it depends. You have to first assess your own personal situation. That is, not everybody has an emergency fund.
Right.
Right? So if you have an emergency fund, the question is how long is that? That is, if you are not earning something, how long do you have before you start earning something? Right? If unfortunately you don't have an emergency fund, then you have no choice. You need to get back in the game, start earning something, whether it's you've been a contractor or whatever the case may be. But that, I think that your choices are limited. The only thing you can do is to try not to beat yourself up too much about it, because if you're an employee in a company that got impacted, it wasn't really your fault, right? It's not even 100% always the CEO's fault. The market is just really brutal right now. There are companies that would have raised $1 million in 2021 that can't raise 100K today, right? So it's just a completely different mind game. So if you don't have an emergency fund, just focus on getting yourself paid. If you have an emergency fund, I would actually say take your time. When I decided to step down from being the CEO of Bundle to start Nestcoin, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take some time off.
Right.
I went to Ghana, and then in 2 weeks, I had a memo, and investors were like, okay, we want to back your next idea.
Okay.
And I feel like I kind of started very, very quickly. And if I could do it again, I would actually have taken my time. So if you're in a transitionary phase, take your time before you make that next leap.
Okay.
And I think the most important thing is be kind to yourself, because a lot of the biggest challenges is actually what you tell yourself in your own quiet time. So be kind to yourself, lean into your networks, and I would say focus on companies that have raised money recently, because even if people are not like hiring like crazy. If a company has raised money recently, that means like they're in a better financial footing than most, you know, and most likely they will be hiring even if it's not like public. So that would be like my own kind of strategic advice.
Okay, and what would your advice to founders be?
So if you're a founder, I think the first thing is like you need to cut costs, right? Like you can't expect that money will be there when you go out to raise again. Like it was way easier for me to raise $6.5 million than it was to raise 1.9.
Wow.
Right? Like that's this raise was the hardest raise I've done in my life, and I always joke that like if there's one thing that I'm good at is like raising money. So it's so difficult to raise money right now. The bar is so high. So if you're a founder, cut costs. Like if you don't need to raise, don't raise. If you need to raise, don't care about your valuation. Even Mark Zuckerberg in 2008 had to raise a down round, right? So whatever valuation you can get, like just raise the money and keep it going, and try to get profitability as quickly as possible. Sort of ideas or experiments that seem promising, if you can think about it, sort of contributing to like your revenue in the next like 3 months, okay. Like just cut that shit. Excuse my French. But yeah, make very hard decisions very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you very much, Yele. Make very hard decisions very quickly, and if you have been unfortunate to lose your job, if you have emergency funds, take your time. But if you don't, you need to make hard decisions quickly as well, and get on your grind and be able to. Resilience in building, Yele. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I find you very inspiring, and I wish you all the best as you keep building and making the mission of getting Africa to adopt digital currencies come through as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.